I live in Osaka, Japan, and often use the subway to go to work in the morning. One day when I was waiting for the train, I noticed a homeless man standing in a corner of the subway station, muttering to himself as people passed by. He was holding out a cup and seemed to be begging for spare change. A fat woman passed by the homeless man, and I distinctly heard him say, "Pig." Wow, I thought to myself. This homeless man is insulting people, and he still expects them to give him money? Then a tall businessman went by, and the homeless guy muttered, "Human." Human? Well, I couldn't argue with that. Obviously, he was a human. The next day I arrived early at the subway station and had some time to kill, so I decided to stand close to the homeless man and listen to his strange mutterings. A thin, haggard-looking man passed in front of him, and I heard the homeless guy mutter, "Cow." Cow, I thought. The man was much too skinny to be a cow. He looked more like a turkey or a chicken to me. A minute or so later, a fat man went by and the homeless man said, "Potato." Potato? I was under the impression that he called all fat people pig. That day at work, I couldn't stop thinking about the homeless man and his puzzling behavior. I kept trying to find some logic or pattern in what he was muttering. Perhaps he had some kind of psychic ability. I thought, well, maybe he knows what these people were in a previous life. In Japan, many people believe in reincarnation. I observed the homeless man many times and began to think my theory was right. I often heard him calling people things like rabbit or onion or sheep or even tomato. One day my curiosity got the better of me and I decided to ask him what was going on. As I walked up to him, he looked at me and said, "Bread." I tossed some money into his cup and asked him if he had some kind of psychic ability. The homeless man smiled and said, "Yes, indeed. I do have a psychic ability. It's an ability I obtained years ago, but it's not what you expect. I can't tell the future or read minds or anything like that." Then, well, what's your ability? I asked eagerly. "The ability is merely to know the last thing somebody ate," he said. I laughed because I realized he was right. He said bread. The last thing I had eaten for breakfast that day was toast. I walked away shaking my head. Of all the psychic abilities someone could have, that one must be the useless. But, did you notice the horror of this story? There was a single mother who had 3 daughters. The youngest daughter was diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor. The doctors broke the bad news to her mother. They told the poor woman that her daughter had only 3 months to live. The family were devastated by the horrible news. The mother decided to have a family photo taken while her youngest daughter was still alive. That way, they would always have something to remember her by. They hired a professional photographer to come and take the photo. The family posed with the youngest daughter sitting in the middle of the picture, and her mother and oldest sisters arranged around her. Afterwards, they had it framed and hung over the fireplace in the living room. 3 months later, the youngest daughter died in hospital. Her mother and her 2 sisters were at her bedside when she passed away. The funeral took place 2 days later. After the funeral, the mother was sitting in the living room when she happened to glance up at the family photo over the fireplace. She was horrified to discover that her daughter's face in the photo was shifting and changing. It looked distended and deformed, almost demonic. They brought the family photo to the professional photographer and complained. He said he had no explanation for why the photo would suddenly change, making the dead child appear so grotesque. The mother was at her wit's end. She took the family photo to a psychic and begged the psychic to tell her what was wrong. The psychic took one look at the family photo and recoiled in horror. "I'm sorry to have to tell you this," said the psychic. "Unfortunately, your daughter has fallen into hell." There were 2 15-year-old girls named Alice and Sarah who had been best friends since early childhood. They lived in the same neighborhood, attended the same school, and went to the same classes. In short, they were inseparable. However, They were very different characters. When Alice was cheerful and outgoing, Sarah was very shy and quiet. One day, Sarah and Alice were talking about their friendship. "Do you think we'll be best friends forever?" asked Alice. "I think so," replied Sarah. "Why wouldn't we?" "I don't know," said Alice. "Sometimes when people get older, they grow apart." "I have an idea," said Sarah. "Let's take a blood oath." "A what?" asked Alice, surprised. "A blood oath," said Sarah. "Look, we both have to swear that we'll be best friends forever. If we ever lose touch, we both swear that we will do everything we can to make sure we will be together forever." "That's nonsense, Sarah," said Alice. "We won't lose touch. We'll always be together." But Sarah continued to insist, and with a mixture of amazement and amusement, Alice finally agreed to the proposal. Sarah found 2 needles and handed one to Alice. The girls took a piece of paper and wrote "Best Friends Forever" on the top, and then signed their names at the bottom. They lit a candle and heated the tips of the 2 needles in the flame. Taking their needles, both girls pricked their index fingers and each smeared a drop of blood next to their signature. Their blood oath was now sealed. As the years passed, the girls grew up and left school. Alice went away to college in another city, while Sarah stayed in their hometown and got a job in a local store. Both of them had boyfriends and fell in love. The girls still kept in touch by phone, calling each other at least once a week. When Alice had completed her law degree, she got a good job and decided that it was time to get married. The couple bought a house and settled down. A few years later, they had a beautiful baby boy. Alice was so busy with her family that she rarely found time to call Sarah. It wasn't long before the phone calls stopped completely and the friends lost touch with each other. Although Alice would sometimes still think about her best friend from her youth, she never took the trouble to pick up the phone and call her. In the end, life had led the 2 women down different paths, and they had not seen each other since they left school. One night, Alice had a horrible nightmare. She was driving along an endless highway when suddenly a truck in front of her began to swerve into her lane. The truck skidded and then collided with her car. She woke up suddenly, soaked in sweat. Just as she was trying to calm herself down, she heard her front doorbell ringing. She glanced at the clock by her bedside and realized it was after 3 a.m. Her husband was fast asleep on the other side of the bed. At that moment, the doorbell rang again, insistently. Wondering who could be coming to visit at that time of night, Alice got up, threw on her nightgown, and went downstairs. When she opened the front door, she was shocked to see a woman standing on the porch. The woman was terribly pale, extremely haggard, and had a huge bleeding wound on her forehead. Although she had changed a lot, Alice recognized her immediately. It was her old friend Sarah. "Oh my God, Sarah, what happened?" she cried. Sarah just stared at her. "Come in, out of the rain," said Alice. "Are you hurt?" Sarah didn't move from where she was. "What's wrong, Sarah?" pleaded Alice. "Long time no see, Alice," hissed Sarah. "I've come to fulfill my promise. I've come to tell you I died." Alice was speechless. Sarah held up her hand and pointed at Alice with her index finger. Her finger was dripping blood. "Life has separated us," Sarah continued, "but we will be together in death. I'll be waiting." Alice then fainted and collapsed on the ground. The next morning, when Alice woke up, she found that she was laying in bed next to her husband. She rubbed her eyes and wondered if the events of last night had all been just a bad dream. At breakfast, she turned on the television, and what she saw chilled her to the bone. The local newscaster was saying that the night before, right around 3 a.m., there had been a fatal traffic accident. A truck had collided with a car on the highway. The driver of the car had been killed on impact. The driver of the car was a woman named Sarah. From that moment on, Alice's life became a living hell. She barely ate a thing. She forgot to pick up her child from school, and when she went to work, she couldn't concentrate on anything. Every night, she had the same terrible dream. She would awake to the sound of the front door bell ringing. She would open the door and find Sarah standing there, her bloody index finger pointing straight at Alice. Each time, Sarah would say the same thing: "I'll be waiting." Each morning, Alice awoke in a cold sweat. She looked down at her bed sheets, and they would be streaked with blood. She felt an excruciating pain in her finger, and when she looked, her finger was covered in blood. Her husband did not understand what was happening. He took his wife to see a doctor and a psychiatrist, but neither of them could find any explanation. Alice's condition only grew worse, and in her nightmares she began seeing Sarah standing at her bedside, pointing with her bleeding finger. One night, the husband was awakened by a dreadful noise. It was the sound of breaking glass. He ran out to the bathroom and discovered that the window was broken. Peering outside, he saw Alice lying on the sidewalk, her limbs askew. The horrified man rushed downstairs and out the front door. There was a pool of blood around his wife's head. Beside her on the pavement, someone had written in her blood, "Friends forever." One day, a couple went out on a date. They wanted a little bit of privacy, so they drove to a mountain known to be a good spot for young couples. A few hours later, the sun started to go down and they started to head home. Somehow, they made a wrong turn and found themselves on a road they weren't familiar with. It was already late, though, so they continued down the narrow road until they found themselves in front of a tunnel. They definitely hadn't passed through it on their way there, and it was definitely creepy, but it was the only way they could go. So they slowly drove into the tunnel. Bang! As soon as the darkness enveloped the car, something hit the rear window. Startled, the woman turned around to see what it was, but she didn't see anything. There weren't even any other cars behind them as far as she could tell. They were completely alone in the tunnel. Bang! Bang! Her boyfriend began to speed up and attempt to get out of the tunnel faster. Bang! 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 It sounded as if dozens of things were striking the car from all directions. The man pressed his foot harder on the gas pedal. They both wanted to get somewhere with people as soon as possible. The tunnel ended after what seemed like an eternity, and shortly thereafter they found their way to a small gas station on the side of the road. The two got out of the car and felt relief as soon as they stood under the bright lights. Just as they were getting ready to get back in the car, the woman noticed that there were handprints all over the windows. They were all sizes and shapes, and there were barely an inch of space on the glass that wasn't covered in handprints. Shaken, they asked the gas station worker to clean the windows for them. The two sat back down in the car and watched as a man quickly got to work on cleaning their windows. As he wiped and scrubbed, the two in the car felt a cold fear creep up their spines. He continued scrubbing all the same, but when he finished all the windows, he cocked his head to the side and walked up to the driver's side window and knocked lightly. "I'm sorry," he said, "but all these handprints, they're on the inside." It was the middle of the night and I was in the bedroom trying to relax. I changed the channel on the TV and I saw the local news was on. At the bottom of the screen there was a breaking news alert. Murderer on the loose, hiding in the vicinity. Police warning everyone to be on the alert. Suspect is armed and dangerous. I was just drifting off to sleep when I was awakened by a strange noise downstairs. It sounded like there was someone in the house. At that moment, my heart began beating fast and I broke into a cold sweat. Straining my ears to listen, I thought I heard another noise. It was the sound of a door creaking. It wasn't my imagination. There was an intruder in the house. I have to get out of here fast, I thought. I slipped off the bed as quietly as possible and crept towards the window. My body was shaking with fear and I was hoping I didn't make any noise. Just then, I heard faint footsteps making their way up the stairs. It sounded like more than one person. At any second, they would burst through the door and I had to get away. I climbed out the window and onto the garage roof, moving as fast as I could without making too much noise. At the edge of the roof, I grabbed the drain pipe and lowered myself down until I dropped into the garden. As I paused, I looked up at the window I had just escaped from, and I saw the lights go on. That was close, I thought. A chill ran down my spine as I thought about what would have happened if they caught me. I made my way to the bottom of the garden and into the woods. Once I was safely hidden by trees, I broke into a run. I pushed onwards, stumbling through the darkness, moving through the undergrowth until I came to another housing estate. Clutching my knife, I headed towards another house. In Korea, when a patient is taken to hospital, a white wristband is placed on their left arm. These wristbands contain the patient's name and information. When a patient dies, a red wristband is placed on their right arm and they're taken into the morgue. In one particular hospital in Korea, a young doctor was working the night shift. It was around 2 a.m. when he finished his last operation. He was on his 5th floor and pressed the button for the elevator. The doctor was tired after a long day and was looking forward to the end of his shift. At 2 a.m., the hospital was very quiet. Most of the patients were asleep and many nurses had already gone home. He entered the elevator and there was just one other person there. He casually chatted with the woman while the elevator descended. The elevator stopped at the basement and the door opened. They saw an old man dressed in a white gown standing there. The old man was just about to get in when the doctor suddenly slammed the close button and punched the button for the 5th floor. "Why did you do that?" asked the astonished woman. "I've performed a lot of operations," replied the doctor, "and I've seen a lot of people die. When a patient dies, they get a red wristband placed on their arm." The woman was silent. "You saw it, didn't you?" said the doctor. That old man had a wristband, a red one, on his arm." "A red wristband," said the woman as she raised her right arm. "You mean like this one?" A husband and wife were home one evening when they heard a knock on the door. When they went to answer it, there was a strange gentleman standing on the doorstep. He was dressed in an expensive black suit and he was holding a large briefcase. "I wonder if I might have a few moments of your time," he said. Assuming he was a traveling salesman, they invited him in. The gentleman placed his briefcase down on the kitchen table and took something out. It was a box with a single red button on the top. He handed the box to the husband and the wife. "Today is your lucky day," he said in a calm tone. "You have an opportunity to become rich beyond your wildest imagination. If you press this button, you will receive $1 million in cash. There's just one catch. Someone you don't know will die." Saying that, the gentleman opened up his briefcase and showed them the stacks of money inside. The gentleman told them that he would return the next day to collect the box. After he left, the husband and wife discussed the box. They argued for hours on hours and hours. Eventually, they decided to press the button. Nothing happened. The next day, the gentleman came back. He took the box and in exchange, he gave them the $1 million. As he was about to leave, the husband asked, "Did someone really die?" "Of course," the gentleman replied. "It happened last night, in a distant place. Someone you don't know, they died." The husband felt guilty. His conscience was eating at him. "One more question," he said. "Yep, what do you want to know?" said the gentleman. "Well, what are you going to do with the box now?" The gentleman smiled and said, "I'm going to give it to someone who doesn't know you."